Maine. A few little things before we get started. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen or in the Q&A function on the bottom bar. If you'd like to buy a copy of any of tonight's books, I'm going to include the link to the print page in the chat box, so you can click right on through and you'll be able to see everybody's books there. And on now to tonight's speakers. The first speaker tonight, and we'll go in order here. Tobias Carroll is the managing editor of the literary website Volume 1 Brooklyn. He is the author of 2 books, Real and Transitory. His writing has been published by Vulture, Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, Hazlitt, Literary Hub, and the Paris Review, among others. And he is going to be talking about his book, Political Sign. Toby.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. Absolutely thrilled to be here. And yeah, so this book here is Political Sign. It is a book about, as you might expect, political signs. I'm going to read a very, very, very short excerpt from it, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 objects that helped in the making of it and one other relevant object that goes along with that. So this is the very opening of chapter 13, When Art is a Sign. It goes like this. At the most basic level, political signage and art have always had a symbiotic relationship. Before the era of widespread photographic reproduction, illustrations of candidates were frequently used on posters and signs for particular campaigns. A poster for Ulysses S. Grant's 1872 re-election campaign featured heroic illustrations of Grant and his running mate Henry Wilson as, respectively, a tanner and shoemaker. The 2 stand heroically, clad in clothing appropriate to their professions. The effect is not unlike a temporal echo of Soviet-era socialist realism. Other political posters harkened back to an even earlier era of art. The Democratic ticket of Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro did just that in their 1984 run for the Oval Office. Among their signage was a poster on which a design referred to Eugène Delacroix's 1830 painting, Liberty Leading the People. The painting channeled several decades of French revolutionary fervor and depicted a woman carrying the tricolor flag and leading a group of revolutionaries onward. The Mondale-Ferraro poster placed Ferraro at the center, wearing a gown, a more modest choice of attire than the incongruously topless figure in Delacroix's painting, and holding an American flag. She stands elevated above the figures in the rest of the poster, including a woman prostrating herself at Ferraro's feet, and Mondale himself carrying a rifle in which a banner waves, advocating on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment. It's not the most direct way to advertise the Mondale-Ferraro ticket, Susan Carlson of the International Center for Photography told me, but it attempts to position their candidacy in terms of historical global struggles. So that's a little taste of Political Sign. And when it comes to objects that were very useful in terms of making this book happen, one in very practical terms is a good pair of headphones. I wrote a large chunk of this book while on 2 residencies last year. One in Nebraska and one in Iceland. Especially the one in Iceland, we were all based in a common space, and really just being able to put on a nice pair of headphones and listen to music and focus in on what I was doing was vitally important. It is probably a little overly pragmatic and a little overly, how the sausage is made, but honestly, the headphones were vitally important, and I do not know that that book would exist without those headphones. One other thing that helped make this happen, this is John Berger's book, Confabulations. John Berger's writing was a really, really big influence on the writing of Political Sign. Berger, and I would say also Rebecca Solnit, were stylistically really where I was kind of going, the kind of wanting to be able to touch on a lot of things, both pop culture and art and politics and activism, and cover a whole lot of ground. And I think really they're both, as far as writers who cover that much ground, I think you really, it's difficult to do better than the 2 of them. And I picked the Berger book up when I was in London last year and sort of read through it before I sat down and started working on mine to kind of get kind of inspired for what I was going to do. And the third item, I don't know if you can see this, but it is a button for when DC Comics in the year 2000 had a storyline in which Lex Luthor, Superman's arch nemesis, ran for the presidency, and they made little political buttons for his candidacy, which is kind of ridiculous, but also not, especially given the way that politics have gone in the US since then. And really, Political Sign is a book that touches on both actual political signs and political signs in art and in narrative. And I feel like the idea of a real political sign, in this case a button, for a fictional candidate is just kind of perfect and lines up with a lot of the things that I'm talking about in the book. So yeah, and I think that about makes my 5 minutes. So yeah, you know, I hope you, if you are intrigued, yeah.
Thanks, Toby. All right, next up we have Laura Waddell, who is a writer and publisher based in Scotland. In 2019, she won a Wright to End Violence Against Women award for her column in the Scotsman newspaper. She currently sits on the editorial board of Gutter magazine. Her cultural criticism and fiction have appeared in the TLS, Guardian, Kinfolk, McSweeney's, and several anthologies, as well as on BBC Radio 4 and BBC Scotland. And Exit is her first book. And Laura, are you joining us from Scotland?
Yeah, hi from
Oh
Scotland.
my goodness, so you and Hunter, it is 1 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's 11:15 here, so not quite so bad.
Okay, all right. I don't feel quite as bad right now.
So this is my book, Exit, and it's essentially a collection of short chapters about exit as a theme. So I started looking at exit signs, and it's something that has always attracted me. I've always just noticed them in the corner, just gleaming green. And I became really interested in the development of exit signs, and I realized that you can see some interesting social history in the development of the tech. So from lit bulbs that couldn't withstand flood and fire to quite modern technology. And they're still evolving. They'll continually evolve. But really, they're all about communication and how we communicate essential information to each other. So I started looking at that, and beyond the history, I realized there are exits everywhere, all around us. So exits are about how we come and go in the world. There are exits in transport, architecture, politics, in our personal lives. They're everywhere. So I'm going to read a little bit from this now, a very little bit, that hopefully shows you why I became quite so interested in this strange subject. Exits. A point between here and there, in or out. An often subversive, only occasionally signposted dividing line between one thing and another. What happens when we cross over to the other side? At one point in my early life, I had a recurring dream of a small, dark basement lounge. Other details were largely indistinct against black velvety walls. There was maybe a wooden stool and a small stage elevated one step above the floor. The slim suggestion of a bar in the back, but that's not important. Nobody else but me and my thoughts. If there was a performer, I was it. The only audience member too. It's my subconscious, after all. But the most striking thing was a bright green exit sign, illuminated and blazing coolly, on the outside of the building, instead of the inside, as though to go through the door was to exit one reality and enter another. And the object that I'm going to show you, I forgot about this until I just saw Toby's. So I've had to look around to see what objects are in distance. And it's one of these heated pads filled with lavender. And I didn't intend it to be tartan because, you know, I'm here among Americans showing off my Scottishness. I didn't intend that, but I use this all the time when I'm curled up in my chair and it's cold. And when I wrote this book at the start of the year, finished it at that point, the edits, I curled up for 3 or 4 days just to get to the deadline and felt consumed by this topic. I felt like I went a little bit mad. So I spent a lot of time wrapped up in warm things, hibernating, trying to get the ideas to come at the very last minute. So that's Exit. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is Erica Wright. Erica is a senior editor and the poetry editor at Guernica Magazine. She is the author of 6 books, most recently All the Bayou Stories End, With Drowned, and Famous in Cedarville. Her writing has appeared in The Rumpus, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Pace, New Orleans Review, and Bomb Magazine, among other publications. Her new book through object lessons is called Snake, and I'm just gonna close my eyes and hum to myself because snakes are my absolute worst fear. No, I'm just kidding. I will listen with rapt attention. Everybody join me in welcoming Erica Wright.
Thank you so much. And in fact, a fear of snakes is the #1 phobia in the US. It ranks higher than public speaking, even though you are more likely to die from a spider bite here in the States. So if that's any comfort at all. Yes, my new book is Snake. And this has actually been a 7-year journey. I didn't expect it to be a 7-year journey. But in 2013, I attended the Rattlesnake and Wildlife Festival in Claxton, Georgia. I had recently moved to Atlanta, and someone told me very casually that the state still hosted roundups. And just kind of coincidentally, roundups had been something I had been interested in since seeing a photograph, a Richard Avedon photograph of a 13-year-old boy, Boyd Fortin, who had killed and skinned a rattlesnake at one of these roundups. So for my object, I'm actually going to share a link to this photograph. I was trying to think of the best way to show it, and I think this will be nice because you all can zoom in if you'd like to see any details. And this was just an image that had haunted me for years. And so when I found out that there was a roundup, or there were roundups in Georgia, I really wanted to go. I thought, oh, this will be great. I can go finally see a roundup in person. I can write about it. And then I started doing a little research and actually viewed footage from these events and was so horrified. Speaking of covering your eyes, I could barely watch the footage. So I just knew there was no way that I was going to make it through an actual roundup. I'm a bit of a fainting goat. I sort the slightest bit of blood and I'm out. So I thought there's no way. If you're not familiar with what a roundup is, they've been around for decades. They tended to take place in kind of small towns where rattlesnakes were a problem, and they've become something quite different. But originally, the idea was kind of once a year, townsfolk would go out, they would gather all of the rattlesnakes they could find, they would kill them, they would eat them. It was a celebration, but there was also, it had this kind of practical purpose. But they've turned into something that is sort of a mix between a carnival and a fair, and also these sort of events where tens of thousands of rattlesnakes are rounded up, tortured and killed, and a beauty pageant queen is crowned, and they were too much for me. So instead, I journeyed down to Claxton, Georgia, and attended the Rattlesnake and Wildlife Festival, which was an appreciation weekend. So I ate fried pickles. I also saw pageant queens posing with enormous diamondback rattlesnakes. And there were some frightening species there, but the point of the weekend was this idea of humans kind of are much more dangerous than any animal, including venomous little danger noodles. And it really sparked this sort of sea change for me. I'd always been quite afraid of snakes as well, even though I know kind of practically it's not a rational fear. About 7 people in the US die from snake bites every year. And almost without exception, those are people who are trying to kill them. So it's this kind of funny, irrational fear, but so many people have it. And that was really the main question that I was exploring in the book. What causes us to have fear? Is it biological? Is it cultural? And what do we kind of do in the name of fear? So what can we excuse if we're afraid? So again, 7 years later, snake. I've got this cute little Western shovel-nosed snake on the cover. And thanks, everyone.
There we go. My mouse didn't want to work there for a second. Next up, we have Hunter Dukes. Hunter is a lecturer of English literature. Is it Tampere University or Tampere?
Tampere.
Tampere University in Finland, and a former research fellow at Peterhouse University of Cambridge, UK. Please join me in welcoming Hunter Dukes.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I think I'm in a slightly more Eastern time zone than everyone, so you have to bear with me because it's very early Friday morning, but it's kind of been dark continually throughout the days lately, so it doesn't make much of a difference. The object I brought is my old California driver's license, and this got me into some trouble once upon a time, and this is kind of the story that begins the book, the signature, especially on the California driver's license, when I was much younger and much less pale. And I had just moved to the UK from Southern California. I was going to graduate school there, and some colleagues took me out to a local pub for a drink. And they were explaining on the way the round system in the UK, which I had never heard of, that people buy all of the drinks in rounds. I thought they were kind of trying to dupe a naive American, but I went along with it, and I said, okay, I'll get the first round. And I went up to the bar, and there was a very grizzly barkeep there, publican. He was very intimidating, and I hadn't really lived abroad before, and I was nervous. But I ordered the pints, and I went to pay. I took out my American credit card, and this was really before there was contactless payments, before they waived signatures for a certain amount of a certain price. So of course the receipt printed. I had to sign my name. And the charming and kind of mad thing that I encountered using American credit cards in England was occasionally you would have a publican like this one who took things very seriously. And this was not, just a kind of a simple transaction. This was a moment for him to become a graphologist or an interpreter of signatures. And so he held up the signature to the light, took my credit card, held up that as well. He examined it, looked very closely, and he said to me, "No, I don't think so. Sorry, it isn't you." I said, "What do you mean it isn't me? Of course it's me." He said, "No, it's not your signature." I said, "Whose is it?" He said, "It looks like another gent's." And I had never heard the shortening of gentleman to gents, so I was equally confused. And I said, "What?" And he said, "What?" And it kind of devolved into this who's on first scenario. And so eventually I pulled out this driver's license and said, "Well, look, it's me." And the amazing thing was, he said, "Yeah, but the signatures don't match, and this is about signature, right? So I don't care what that photo looks like. It's all about the sign." And it's silly to say that I had an existential crisis in a pub in Cambridge, but I kind of did in a sense. And it was this moment of being told that you are not yourself, that your signature doesn't quite correspond. But it was also a seductive entree to possibly become another, to change, to evolve. So I think throughout my book, there's that's the tension that I build on, this idea that it's really a fantasy, right? That our signatures somehow represent us, that their curves are unique to us alone, that we can reproduce them. But also the way that signatures could lend themselves to anonymity. So I have a chapter where I begin with autograph collecting. I interview Adam Andrusier, who Zadie Smith based her Autograph Man novel on, and he firmly believes that collecting other people's autographs somehow protects him from death. And then I move really kind of back in time to think about, well, what were the first signatures? And the thing I discovered, which I thought was very interesting, is I always thought signatures came from handwriting, right? There was something that were produced after we had pens. But it seems like even before we had writing, we were stamping things, we were leaving signs that were identifiable and traceable. So I think about handprinting in caves especially, and that strange feeling if you've ever seen a very old handprint, about how the individual is completely effaced, completely anonymous, but I at least felt a certain kind of kinship that, here's another human. I move on to think about the really violent and painful history of marking each other, of signing our names on people to subjugate them, but also the erotic correlate to that of how we sometimes get tattoos of loved ones' names to try to feel closer. I think about digital signatures and signature matching, which I think will have great implications for the upcoming election. And then finally, I turn outwards to animal signatures and non-human signatures, and the way that certain animals leave scent trails as if they're almost signing their name, or how climate scientists can go to Greenland and pull out ice cores and reconstruct the climate signatures at certain periods of history. But the kind of funny irony I want to end on is this beautiful cover that Bloomsbury designed. It looks very much like it's my name and my signature, but it's completely contrived and it has nothing to do with my own signature. So I think maybe the publican was right. Maybe, maybe he would say, "I told you so." I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. Up next, we have Shonna Milliken Humphrey, who is the author of Show Me Good Land and Dirt Roads and Diner Pie. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Salon. For 2 years, she was a food writer for the Maine Sunday Telegram here in Portland, and she's here tonight to talk to us about her new book, Gin, my favorite location.
Thank you, Emily. So sure, I thought I would read just the first couple of paragraphs and then talk to you about a little bit about gin. What I discovered is that gin is kind of like that Kevin Bacon game where it's connected within 7 degrees of everything. So gin is fundamentally the combination of juniper and any neutral spirit. But depending upon perspective, gin is also grandfathers, Christmas, or sweaty summer nights. Rotten pine needles or raging headaches. Bathtub hooch, speakeasies, British gin acts, or prohibition. It's Hogarth prints, vintage magazine advertisements, or James Bond. Gin is Snoop Dogg, juniper berries, malaria treatments, 17th century Dutch history, or poured over ice with lime. It's a shortened form of Jennifer, although not really, and with a linguist's eye, it's a cottonseed separating machine, biblical snare, or a quaint 4-person card game. For me, gin is the first alcohol I tasted. I was barely 16 and employed at a small town movie theater. The general manager, may he now rest in peace, ran a homegrown ammunition factory from the office above the ticket booth. He also drank gin from waxed paper Pepsi cups. And he set up a casual shooting range behind the screen. Before or after our shifts, he sometimes let concession girls fire guns. He sometimes let us drink gin too. So this is what what kind of sparked my interest in gin, and I found out that the history and the connection that gin has with pretty much everything is just astounding. So what I want to show you tonight is, this is what I learned, is that the first vending machine, so the first automatic sort of vending machine, it dispensed gin. And not only did it dispense gin, it was also in the shape of a cat. So I don't know if you can see that, but it was in the 1700s, 1757 roughly. And what people would do is, because it was illegal to buy, they would go down these dark London alleys and they'd kind of look for this sign and they would meow, basically. Like you would meow your way down an alley. And then if you got a response, like a meow back, essentially, you would put your money into the mouth, and then someone would pour down this lead pipe out of the cat paw, a measure of gin. So yeah, it really just struck me as this just super, super interesting thing. And kind of like Laura, towards the end of this book's process, I just found myself kind of going inward and thinking, oh God, I got to finish this, I've got to end this. But gin just doesn't end. You start pulling that thread and it is everywhere. And I could spend hours telling you about all these weird and crazy little gin fun facts, like, that the Tom Collins, the famous gin drink, it's actually really, it started out as this nasty social game and trick that people would play on people. Or, when you think about music, gin's presence in music, a lot of people think of it as Snoop Dogg or Wiz Khalifa, gin and drugs. And I won't rap for you right now because that would just be embarrassing for all of us. But gin is in country music, it's glam rock, it's folk, it's Victrola era novelty songs, it's punk rock, it's disco. There's a Bee Gees song that references gin. So again, the more I found out, the more I just fell in love with it. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to talk with you about it, either now or offline, or reach out to me. But I'm always happy to talk gin. So that is my object.
My kids are starting to get loud, so I apologize. Next up, we have Sheila Liming, who is an associate professor in the writing program at Champlain College and is the author of What a Library Means to a Woman, Edith Wharton and the Will to Collect Books. And she's here to talk about her book, Office.
Thank you. I was hoping I wouldn't have to go after Jen because Jen's just the best subject ever, right? But I will talk to you tonight about my book, which is, coming out, hitting shelves in 2 weeks, which is about offices, and it is called Office. And I brought an object to go along with what I'm talking about tonight, which is my red swingline stapler. Those of you who are familiar with the movie Office Space know that this stapler plays a very pivotal role in that 1999 film. It's the stapler that causes an inter-office war and ends up getting the office burned down when a disgruntled employee is mad that someone has stolen his stapler. So I brought it not only because it's a very significant piece of office equipment with which we're all familiar, but also because it represents the effort of the worker in some ways to inject personality, or what the film calls flair, into the office space, meaning into your office environment. When we think of office environments, we think of them as being extremely anonymous and without personality or character. We think of those carpeted cubicle walls. I myself have occupied several of them in my time. And we think of, bland furnishings and overhead lighting and beige carpeting and that kind of thing. But offices have also been the site of innovation and design opulence and flair and arguments about aesthetically what that space should be for the people who occupy it. And I'll tell you what got me thinking about this subject when I first had the idea to write the book, which was several years ago. I was visiting some friends in Chicago, and my friends work in the tech sector. And it was a Friday, and one of my friends said, well, we should get together for a happy hour drink. It's a Friday. And I said, yes, absolutely. And he said, well, why don't you just come by my office? We have an in-house bartender on Fridays, and he's great. And I was like, hey, that's not my office. That's not where I work. So I would love to check this out. So I go to their office, which has a pool on the roof, and it has elaborate floral arrangements that are dropped off every Thursday for everybody at their desks. And it has, ping pong tables and showers and things like that. It's amazing because it's not my office. It's the office of a very, very wealthy tech company. And the whole reason this office space was created to such lavishness and opulence was because people weren't using it anymore. People in this office didn't really need to commute to the office anymore. They could do most of their jobs from home. And this was 4 years ago, before the pandemic happened. And so the office had started to be concerned about how much of their workers were coming in and basically being on the clock in a way that they could track. So they tried to make their office space more attractive to the office workers so that they would come in and spend more time there. This is actually an idea that was pioneered by some Silicon Valley tech companies like Facebook and Google, which did similar things in the early 2000s to make their office spaces much more attractive, basically to get people in the door and then get them to work longer hours. If the office space is more comfortable, then people will relax in it. They'll kind of mix playtime and leisure time with working time. And pretty soon you're never off the clock and you just work all the time in the offices everywhere you go. When I wrote this book, I did not know that the coronavirus was going to radically change our relationships with offices. Right now, I'm sitting in the office that I occupy now, which is this tiny, weird little room in my house now. But I did try to predict or forecast that the office was going to change and possibly go away. The last chapter of my book is called The End of the Office. And I thought something like this was going to happen. I just didn't know it was a pandemic that was going to cause it. And the reason I thought it was going to happen because I was thinking about that situation that I was in at those lavish offices in Chicago. And I was thinking about how many companies could probably actually afford to pull that off, and figured probably not very many. So what I was observing was a divide between gorgeous, beautiful, lavish office spaces designed for basically the upper crust of a given company, and often off limits to lower ranking workers, versus, the cubicles of yore that we're all more used to. So for the book, I toured a number of contemporary office spaces in the United States, including the Spheres, the Amazon headquarters in downtown Seattle, and places like that that really have this aesthetic on display, that for certain members of the company, you get access to these gorgeous, lavish office places, and everybody else, you take your laptop to Starbucks and you figure it out for yourself, which is what I think most of us are kind of doing now, only we're doing it in our homes instead of in Starbucks. So I was inspired by Milton and his swingline stapler. And the funny thing is, I don't know where I got this. It came into my life somewhere. I mean, I may have grifted it from somebody else's cubicle at some point in time. Probably I inherited it, because most of my office equipment I've gotten from moving into a space that somebody else used to occupy. And that's where my mug collection has come from, and my staplers and everything else. So I don't know who the original owner is. I would love to know, but thinking about the kind of legacies of who occupies these spaces and who has occupied before them was really something that inspired me in the book. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Hanne Blank is a cultural historian who works in the intersections of gender and sexuality, the history of medicine, bioethics, and politics. Her books include Straight, The Surprisingly Short History of Heterosexuality, and Virgin, The Untouched History. She currently serves on the faculty for Women and Gender Studies at Denison University, and she's here tonight to talk to us about her book, Fat. Please join me in virtually welcoming Hanne Blank.
Thank you so much. What a treat. I love these books. And it is a real joy to hear all of my fellow authors talking about their books. I actually decided I wanted to write one of these books because I stumbled across one in the university library, and I thought, these are so cool that I really want to, I want one too. So what actually inspired me to work on this book is that, as you may be able to tell by kind of looking at this image on your screen, I'm a fat person. I have been a fat person all my life. I have been writing books about fat people and fat people things for 20 years. So I have done a lot of thinking about fat, about what it means to be fat in Western culture, about what it means to live in a body that is defined as fat or that you experience as fat. And the big thing that I have come away with after, literally my entire life of thinking about this subject is that we don't think very clearly about fat at all. And that in fact, our culture teaches us to think so emotionally about fat that it's very hard to think clearly or logically about this subject. And so this little tiny book, and I love this cover makes me very happy. It has bacon on it. Finding a cover image for something like that is surprisingly difficult. We were thinking, oh, giant bottle of olive oil, there's so many options and none of them work as well as bacon. But this tiny little book is my attempt to sort of shake up the way that we think about fat and to suggest that there's more here. This is richer and a fattier subject, if you will, than may meet the eye. So I'm going to read just the opening of the 4th chapter of this book. There are 6 short chapters and an introduction. This is the chapter called Fetish. One day, not so long ago, in the tiny Mennonite-run grocery store in the next small town over, on which I rely for Amish cheese and bulk baking supplies, it suddenly sprouted a set of end-cap shelves devoted exclusively to jars of coconut oil. Coconut oil is, shall we say, not exactly a traditional Mennonite ingredient. Yet there it was, jar after jar of the stuff, a testament to the depth and reach of a particularly strong and fashionable fat fetish. Touted by health food enthusiasts as being almost as good for you, point for point, as actually being fat is claimed to be bad for you, coconut oil fans claim that it can reduce belly fat, reduce harmful cholesterol, strengthen the immune system, prevent heart disease, curb appetite, and prevent Alzheimer's disease, to say nothing of keeping your teeth and gums gleaming and cavity-free. Coconut oil has long been popular with vegans because as a fat that's 80 to 90% saturated, it behaves a lot like butter, which makes it especially useful for baking. But its current trendiness has nothing to do with the fact that you can make a decent puff pastry with it. Rather, a few currently trendy weight loss diet regimens like the ketogenic and quote-unquote paleo diets tout coconut oil as a wonder worker. And so it's become ubiquitous, even on the shelves of a little store in a small town in Ohio, staffed by freshly scrubbed women in high-necked cotton dresses, sturdy shoes, and pleated white caps. Mind you, according to the Harvard School of Public Health, the few daily tablespoons of coconut oil anyone is likely to actually consume isn't enough to make much difference one way or another, but the actual functionality of an object has never been the point of a fetish. A fetish, in the broader non-sexual meaning of the word, is an object that is worshipped for its associations, its symbolic content, its magical powers. In the United States, for instance, some people fetishize the Confederate flag as a touchstone for the rebellious, the anti-government, the independent, the Southern, and in addition, the racist and the white supremacist. In a very different way, others fetishize old school vinyl audio recordings as talismans of a time when they believed the music industry, or maybe music itself, was somehow truer and more real than it is today. And so it is with fat. And so that's how I began that chapter, and talking about the many of the different ways that we fetishize fat. And I brought along, just as a little plus, this is my own personal jar of coconut oil, which, by the way, I use mostly for cooking Thai food. So that's a tiny little intro to the fat book. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful host.
All right, thanks everyone. So we have about 5-10 minutes left for questions. One just came in. So bear with me here as I read it out loud. Shannon says, this is really great, enjoying it very much. Just wondering if any of the panelists have any thoughts on why there is suddenly, or so it seems, a surge of scholarship on random, quote unquote, random objects and the relationship of everything to everything. Also to Sheila, is the end of the office a good thing? As someone who has spent way too much time in offices, I am cheering its demise.
I just have a quick thing to say about that. I wonder if we are interested in objects because we're starting to question what our reality is, what the texture of it is, because we're spending so much time online now, and even more so now with COVID. Perhaps we're starting to think about the shape of things and what it means to really engage with something. That's all I've got to say about that.
I just wanted to chime in on that. I think as a historian, one of the things that I see, especially among my students and as well as my colleagues, is this fascination with the ways that things are connected. And one of the things that I think all of the panelists tonight have talked about, maybe except for me, is the way that these individual objects that we have spent so much time researching and writing about connect to all these other things. And so figuring out how our material lives and these objects that exist in our worlds, they don't just exist by themselves. You know, this little jar of coconut oil is not, is not unconnected to these Mennonite women at the store that I mentioned. It's not unconnected to, the Harvard Medical School health letter. It's not unconnected to whoever it is, wherever in the world these coconuts were actually grown. And so I think that the impulse to dive into the connectedness of our material world is something that's really very strong right now as we try to figure out who we are and where we are in this very global society that we live in, and an increasingly globalized economic culture as well.
All right, we have another one coming in specifically for Hunter. And again, forgive me as I read this out loud here. With signatures and thinking of signatures as beyond the written, we often see people put their hand against handprints or footprints. Do we do this with other types of signatures, and what's potentially happening in that act, even if we know our own foot, hand, or signature won't match up with the one that we're comparing?
Wow, that's a great question. Just Sheila didn't get to answer her part of the question. Did you want to do that?
Oh yeah, Sheila, if you want to answer the question of the office, and then we'll move it on to Hunter. Thanks.
That was very nice, Hunter. Thank you. I'd be happy to. I was just going to quickly say in answer to the question that had been asked that I view the end of the office as both a good thing and a bad thing. There's actually, drawbacks on either side there. I don't think many of us are going to miss our commutes. And I think that's one of the things that makes offices a frat space, is in taking them away from home, they have to exist at a distance from home, and nobody likes commuting, and that's part of what has made offices absolutely wretched over the years, especially as commutes have gotten longer. But one thing I talk about in the books is actually a loss of community that goes along with operating in communal spaces and shared spaces, especially when it comes to organizing for worker protections and for like good working conditions. Those are things that have typically happened in the past in the office. You have to get people together physically, sharing resources and sharing space if you want them to form a community and have any kind of say about how they are governed within their labor situation.
All right, and Hunter, thank you, and thank you for calling me out on that and giving me that reminder.
No. I just needed more time to think of something to say. You thought I was being nice, but it was all self-serving. I think the question is about hovering hands over handprints, and I think there's probably some Cinderella magic there. You know, if the slipper fits. You see this with Marilyn Monroe impersonators on kind of the walk of Hollywood, that they'll always have their hands there to say, well, if you don't think I actually am Marilyn Monroe, you know, my bodily signatures might say otherwise. So I think it's probably about the play of the outer and the inner. In the book, I kind of go through the history of physiognomy and palm reading and these other kind of occult practices that are all about that, right? Can we read outer characteristics to understand something about kind of moral character? So that would be my answer to that.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, and I'll pose it to everyone. If you were asked to do this again, this is such a fascinating series, object lessons. And so if you could do one more book for object lessons, what would your next object be?
I have one. I can go first because I had a backup in mind, but I was like, until I got into this office idea. But mine would be jukebox, because I think that jukeboxes are fascinating as a history, and they had a big role to play in defining objects that were associated with them. So the 45 record, as we know it, is basically exists because of the jukebox. It was easy for the jukebox arm to pick up and play and then flip side to side. And so, you know, the history of music grows out of that. And jukeboxes are now something very different. If you guys go to you know, restaurants or bars and you're familiar with like the Touch Tunes app, and you're using a jukebox, but you're not. So that would be my backup.
I've always been interested in fast food and art. So I was interested in that to begin with, but then I saw that Berger by Carroll J. Adams was just amazing. So mine would probably be commute. So it's interesting that Sheila's just mentioned that, because I used to have a commute that was about an hour and 15 minutes long, and it was broken up into very short pieces. So I had to walk, then get a train, then get a bus, then walk up a really terrible road. I actually mentioned this in Exit, but I spent a lot of time on that commute thinking about how much I despised it. So I've thought a lot about this subject, so that would be my backup.
I can go next if you'd like. I would do this again in a heartbeat. It was so much fun, and I can think of probably a million objects. And the one that that I thought of that it was already turned into a wonderful essay was The Little Black Dress. Just the whole history. I don't know if you've all read that, but it just was so well done. And how the little black dress evolved from essentially servants' uniforms. And just, I really thought that was interesting, and how that was co-opted that way. But I would do this in a heartbeat. I would do dog food. I would do, I think potato has already been done, but I pretty much just anything that has that little trivia aspect to it, where you can spend a year of your life just falling down this rabbit hole of fun facts, and then end up, you know, completely just in a space where you never anticipated, and being really obnoxious and awful to your friends and family, saying, hey, did you know this? Did you know this? So yeah, I don't know if that was your experience for the others on the panel, but that was certainly mine. And I think it reached a head when I was talking about this one 17th century writer's flatulence as a result of gin, or it was connected to gin. And that's when my husband had to say to me, he's like, is this book going to be boring? And I said, yeah, a little. So, but no, Little Black Dress would be mine.
I have my emergency backup one that I wanted to do is about ink. I am an inveterate fountain pen user. I love ink. It is only through, some great restraint on my part that my entire office is not crammed with bottles of ink. But I'm also fascinated by the role that ink plays just in our world and the various different types of inks that we use and have used over the years. And a lot of this comes from my own obsession, but also because a very dear friend of mine is one of the world's few women Torah scribes. And she's actually the first woman that we know of who wrote an entire Sefer Torah. And so one of the things that is very important about how Torahs get written is they have to be written with a very particular kind of ink that has to be made in a very, very specific way. And I've had some really fascinating conversations with her about the connections between religion and writing this religious, doing this religious scribal writing and ink. So that's something that I would love to pursue. I'd do it again in a heartbeat too.
I'd do it again as well. I find it kind of hard not to do it again. I find myself just now only writing about singular objects for doing that kind of investigation. I would do a book on rocking chairs if anyone would have me. I kind of fell down a hole this summer learning about the fraught history of rocking. In the 19th century, it's connected to strange moments of divine inspiration. It's connected to a kind of virtual travel before there was virtual reality where I found a recipe in an old newspaper this summer that if you opened Tidman sea salt and put it in steaming water and ate a fat ham sandwich, then all of a sudden you could be transported onto some sort of steamship. So there's something going on with rocking chairs I'd love to investigate further, but alas.
If I can up in, I had an unsuccessful proposal for an object lessons that would have been about highway rest stops, and that's probably still my fallback because I still think it's a mightily fascinating idea, and I would love to do something on sort of the weird evolution of them and how that goes hand in hand with the sort of evolution of 20th century America and how rest stops differ in the US from how they exist in Europe, say, and just kind of getting all into the mixture of the romance of the open road and the versus the potential dangers being done to the environment from having cars drive everywhere, which is sort of my perennial guilty pleasure. So rest stops.
Well, I write about venom in snake, but I barely scratched the surface of this absolutely fascinating topic. We are researching venom right now, specifically the toxins in venom for everything from Parkinson's disease to breast cancer to Alzheimer's. And we've really only studied less than 1% of the toxins that exist right now in animals. So snakes, of course, but also scorpions and frogs and things like that. So I would love to do just a deep dive on venom.
Well, great. Thank you again, all for being here tonight, the audience for joining us, and for our authors for being here and both entertaining us and educating us on these fascinating topics. And I promise I will read about snakes because I need to get over my fear about snakes. So I've posted the link again to Print Bookstore, our event page that lists all of these wonderful books tonight. And again, thank you all for coming and have a great night.